The Elon Musk humiliation ritual has officially begun, and it may be even more pathetic than expected. Trump's protest problem in Los Angeles is now spreading as ICE raids, mass arrests, and National Guard deployments are reaching cities like New York, Seattle, and Chicago. Also, what's really going on with his deportations, including a secretive deportation app, undercover ICE raids at courthouses, and judges ordered to dismiss cases without hearings. The West is starting to fracture over Israel, but there is one huge exception. We're jumping into all that and much more on today's extra-large Philip DeFranco show. You daily dive into the news, starting with this. Elon Musk just threw himself at Donald Trump's feet, with him tweeting like a sad ex at 3 o'clock this morning, "I regret some of my posts about President Donald Trump last week. They went too far." And for those who may have forgotten, he signed on to the idea of Trump being impeached, and he also said, "You're in the Epstein files, bro. That's why they haven't been released yet." You know, while it is a rare walkback for a guy who's known for quadrupling down on even the worst takes, it's also not really that surprising. In general, the whole blow-up kind of showed where the base was regarding who they actually support between the two. Though obviously, a lot of their supporters want them to work together and be on the same page. But also because since their massive blow-up, the two have kind of been slowly thawing. With, for example, before this, Musk deleting some of his more inflammatory posts, including tweets linking Trump to the Epstein files, calling for his impeachment, and claiming his tariffs will cause a recession. And then over the weekend, you had Trump sort of maybe kind of walking back his threats to investigate Musk's immigration status or cancel federal contracts with his companies, saying that he hadn't really given the threats any more thought. And while speaking to reporters on Monday, we saw Trump say this of Musk.
"Look, I wish him well. You understand. We had a good relationship, and I just wish him well. Very well, actually."
Right, and then Musk responded to a post of that clip on X with a heart emoji. And then that same day, Trump sat down for an interview for the debut episode of the New York Post new podcast, Pod Force One. And in that episode, which actually aired this morning, you had Trump saying that he was open to reconciling with Musk, which, you know, is a notable reversal from just 2 days before when Trump told NBC that he had no desire to repair his relationship with Musk and that he assumed that the relationship was over.
And what happened with Elon? Is there anything that you can do to forgive him? Could you see that happening?
Well, look, I have no hard feelings. You know, I was really surprised that happened. He went after a bill that's phenomenal. It's the best thing we've ever signed in this country. No, I think a bill is great, and
he just didn't
I think
get that.
he feels very badly that he said that. Actually, I was disappointed.
Yeah.
In him, but you know, it is what it is. That happens. Things like that happen. I don't blame him for anything. That. I was a little disappointed.
Could you reconcile?
Say it?
Could you reconcile with him? Do you think? Could you forgive him?
I guess I could, but you know, we have to straighten out the country.
Yeah.
And my sole function now is getting this country back to a level higher than it's ever been.
But hey, for now, we'll see what happens, if they'll ever get back together. The one thing I will say is it will be eye-opening if they do. Because Trump has generally shown that he doesn't care what the hell you said about him in the past as long as you declare loyalty now. I mean, the guy's VP literally once called him America's Hitler, and now he's like his biggest attack dog. So I guess to some degree, the question becomes, where on the bar is getting called America's Hitler compared to the guy gave you several $100 million to become president, but he also kind of alleged that you're a pedo? Like, where does that show up, and where is his forgiveness level? And also, will all of or how much of MAGA will forgive him and or trust him? Because while you've seen MAGA influencers like Charlie Kirk really trying to navigate this situation, you're also seeing others like Candace Owens replying to Musk's tweet, asking, what specifically do you regret? Do you regret telling the lie that Trump is in the Epstein files, or do you regret telling the truth that he is in the Epstein files? With that then causing some interesting back and forths. For one of her fans responding, normally appreciate your takes, Candace, but this ain't it. They both want to move on, you don't. To which she replied, I do not wish to move on from an insinuation that someone was involved with Epstein. We need full clarification, not a half-assed non-apology. Yeah, for now, we'll have to wait to see what happens with the MAGA base and the orbiters around it, with Donald Trump himself, and if Elon Musk continues what feels like the beginning of a humiliation ritual to get back in Trump's good graces. You know, in the meantime, I'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions in those comments down below. But then from that, next up today, ICE is getting ready to send special response teams to at least 5 Democrat-run cities following the raids and protests in Los Angeles, with NBC News reporting that sources told them that the teams have been ordered to Seattle, Chicago, Philadelphia, Northern Virginia, and New York. Now, currently, we don't know when the raids in those areas will begin, but you also had NBC explaining that special response teams use Bearcat-tracked vehicles, long guns, and tactical vests in operations considered high risk, and were even used in the raid on Sean Diddy Combs' house. Right, and we're seeing this as people in cities all over the country have been protesting in solidarity with Los Angeles against the ICE raids and the use of the National Guard in the city. There were also being arrests at several of the events, and late last night, we got the news that Texas Governor Greg Abbott is deploying the National Guard across the state to ensure peace and order at demonstrations. There's also a ton of focus on Chicago right now after 17 people were arrested yesterday, with 4 being charged with felonies. A car also drove through the crowd and reportedly injured a person. The local outlet said that it was unclear if the car intended to drive through the protest or was trying to get out of the area. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, we saw things like in downtown LA, they had a curfew there and dozens of people got arrested for violating it, with LA Mayor Karen Bass tweeting, "I issued a curfew starting tonight at 8 p.m. for downtown Los Angeles to stop bad actors who are taking advantage of the president's chaotic escalation," and adding, "If you do not live or work in downtown LA, avoid the area. Law enforcement will arrest individuals who break the curfew and you will be prosecuted." With that curfew lasting from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., and it applied to everyone except emergency personnel, media, and residents or workers in the area. Though also, it really only encompassed a small section of the city, right? Just about a square mile, with this map that Bass shared showing just how tiny of an area it is compared to the city as a whole. But still, regarding that curfew, according to reports, that is set to last for several days. And this morning, the LAPD said that 203 people were arrested for failure to disperse and 17 for curfew violations. Though I will say, out of California, the thing that was really making headlines was Governor Gavin Newsom giving a speech addressing the protests and specifically slamming Trump and accusing him of escalating these events by deploying the National Guard to LA's streets.
This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk. That's when the downward spiral began. He doubled down on his dangerous National Guard deployment by fanning the flames even harder. And the president, he did it on purpose. Again, thanks to our law enforcement officers and the majority of Angelenos who protested peacefully, the situation was winding down and was concentrated in just a few square blocks downtown. But that's not what Donald Trump wanted. He again chose escalation. He chose more force. He chose theatrics over public safety. He federalized another 2,000 Guard members. He deployed more than 700 active U.S. Marines.
You also had Newsom condemning the raids that have been conducted in Los Angeles, arguing that they go against the traditional immigration enforcement usually seen in California and traditionally agreed upon by both parties.
What's happening right now is very different than anything we've seen before. On Saturday morning, when federal agents jumped out of an unmarked van near a Home Depot parking lot, they began grabbing people, a deliberate targeting of a heavily Latino suburb. A similar scene played out when a clothing company was raided downtown. In other actions, a U.S. citizen, 9 months pregnant, was arrested. A 4-year-old girl taken. Families separated. Friends, quite literally, disappearing. We're seeing unmarked cars in school parking lots. Kids afraid of attending their own graduation.
And while Newsom also took time out of the speech to speak out against bad actors using this moment to spread violence, right, trying to separate the bad actors from the peaceful protesters, he then spent the last half of it largely slamming Trump and his rhetoric and actions in general, as well as any political leaders who have assisted him.
Democracy is under assault before our eyes. This moment we have feared has arrived. He's taking a wrecking ball to our Founding Fathers' historic project, 3 co-equal branches of independent government. There are no longer any checks and balances. Congress is nowhere to be found. Speaker Johnson has completely abdicated that responsibility. And by the way, Trump, he's not opposed to lawlessness and violence as long as it serves him. What more evidence do we need than January 6th? What Donald Trump wants most is your fealty, your silence, to be complicit in this moment. Do not give in to him.
And then as far as reactions to that, you saw senior Trump advisor Stephen Miller writing, "The entire Democrat Party is committed to the singular proposition of migrants flooding every city in the USA. America voted for mass deportations. Violent insurrectionists and the politicians who enable them are trying to overthrow the results of the election." You also had Trump writing that if our troops didn't go into Los Angeles, it would be burning to the ground right now, just like so much of their housing burned to the ground. And adding, "The great people of Los Angeles are very lucky that I made the decision to go in and help." But with that, there are plenty of Angelenos who do not feel lucky about this administration's actions. And with that, you had Mayor Bass echoing a lot of Newsom's points in writing. The Trump administration told us they were going after violent criminals, gang members, and drug dealers. But they went after a Home Depot. They're going after families and children. That does not make Los Angeles more safe. Angelenos are trying to live their lives, going to work, caring for their families, while facing the constant threat of sudden immigration crackdowns. This fear paralyzes communities. Let's not pretend this is about public safety. It's political retribution, plain and simple. Also, as far as Newsom, tomorrow a judge will hear the case the California California brought against the U.S. government for deploying federal troops. Because you had Newsom filing an emergency order for a temporary restraining order to block the National Guard from being ordered to LA, though that was denied. With the Trump administration opposing the request and asking for more time to respond, and so the judge granted that time and set the hearing for tomorrow. So, we're gonna have to see what comes from that, but that isn't where the question surrounding the use of federal troops ends. Because currently, Marines are reportedly preparing for operations in Los Angeles, though they are not yet on the ground as of this afternoon, as they still have to undergo training on standard rules of force. And so with all that, you had California Senators Adam Schiff and Alex Padilla writing a letter to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth asking him to explain why hundreds of Marines were deployed in the first place, saying a decision to deploy active duty military personnel within the United States should only be undertaken during the most extreme circumstances, and these are not them. In this instance, this extraordinary action was also irresponsibly rushed and lacked clear communication to government officials or the U.S. public. And notably, they're not the only ones putting Pete Hegseth in the hot seat over the use of federal troops, because you had senators grilling him today. And there, we saw Hegseth defending his actions while speaking to Rhode Island Senator Jack Reed.
The mission in Los Angeles, as you know well, sir, is not about lethality. It's about maintaining law and order on behalf of law enforcement agents who deserve to do their job without being attacked by mobs of people. And so we're very proud that the National Guard and the Marines are on the streets defending the ICE agents, and they will continue to do that.
Law and order is a civil function under the Constitution of the United States. Civil enforcement, law enforcement authorities, not the U.S. military.
Though I will say the interaction that's been the most viral so far is the one with Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy, with Murphy arguing that there was a double standard in the way that Hegseth viewed the National Guard being used on January 6th to how they're being used today.
The National Guard was deployed here on January 6th, and that was a decision made by the Department of Defense. Do you support that decision? Do you believe that that was the right decision to deploy the National Guard to defend the Capitol on January 6th?
All I know is it's the right decision to be deploying the National Guard in Los Angeles to defend ICE agents.
And when Murphy kept pushing, Hegseth said this.
Senator, I was in the Washington, D.C. National Guard when that happened and was initially ordered to go guard the inauguration of Joe Biden. But because of the politicization of the Biden administration, my orders were revoked.
With Murphy then still continuing.
But do you support the decision made on January 6th to send the National Guard here to defend
I
the
support
Capitol?
the decision that President Trump made and requesting the National Guard that was denied.
So you do not.
President Trump
you do not support the
requested
decision.
support
You do not
for the
support
National
the
Guard
decision
in
to send the
advance
National
and was
Guard here
denied.
to defend the Capitol. I think that speaks to the worry that many Americans have that there is a double standard, that you are not willing to defend against attacks made on our democracy by supporters of the president, but you are willing to deploy the National Guard to protect against protesters who are criticizing the president.
For now, that is where we are. We're gonna have to keep our eyes on the whole situation, LA, the protests, especially as we get closer and closer to the 14th. Because with the military / Trump's birthday parade going on and the scheduled protests, who knows what's gonna happen. And then you've got even more news coming up in just a minute. But first, that moment when you check your bank account and you suddenly become a detective? Like, who's been spending my money? But the plot twist is it's you. And apparently it's a charge for that meditation app from 2021 that you forgot about. But then enter today's sponsor, Rocket Money, AKA the financial grown-up app that you didn't know you needed. Because Rocket Money, it's a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. And it shows all of your subscriptions in one place. It tracks where your money is going, and it even sends you alerts when your bills go up. Companies are sneaky out there, so you won't get blindsided by that $3 price hike for a streaming service that you forgot you had. And hell, they'll actually negotiate your bills for you. So no more sitting on hold or yelling representative into your phone 17 times. And for me, I set some budget goals in the app and I started saving automatically with their goals feature. And understand, you're not gonna be a guinea pig for this app. Rocket Money has over 5 million users, and they saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. So if you're trying to save more, stress less, and stop wasting money, this is the move. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Just go to rocketmoney.com/PDS today. That's rocketmoney.com/PDS. One more time, rocketmoney.com/PDS. But then from that, next up today, regarding deportations, despite months of trying really, really hard, the Trump administration still can't deport as many people as they want to. Because it's not like the government has a magical list of all the illegal immigrants that they can just immediately arrest and deport. Right? They're literally called undocumented for a reason. You have agents having to identify them, track them down, surveil them, arrest them, prove who ICE says they are, and that all takes a lot of time and it's not very efficient. And so reportedly, the White House, or at least Stephen Miller, has been putting intense pressure on its agencies to get those deportation numbers up, which is why instead of going into homes, which net only a few migrants at a time, if the address is even correct, agents are hitting workplaces like restaurants, factories, and construction sites. Hence, the raid on the Los Angeles Garment District that kicked off nationwide protests and a political showdown between California and Washington that we're witnessing right now. But also, ICE agents, often in plain clothes, have been seen prowling the halls of immigration courthouses and ambushing people there for scheduled hearings, as well as them arresting people who show up at the offices of Citizenship and Immigration Services. I mean, they're often there to apply for things like visas, green cards, and citizenship. And to keep up with the demands from higher up, the agency is reportedly staggering shifts so that agents are available 7 days a week. With one Homeland Security official even telling the New York Times that some undercover special agents responsible for online sex trafficking investigations, they've begun setting up in-person meetings with suspected sex workers to potentially arrest them on immigration charges. And then, thanks to DOJ, ICE reportedly has a new app informally called Alien Tracker that locates people with actionable deportation orders on a map. With that, reportedly centralizing data on more than 700,000 people from agencies across the federal government. With those currently including the FBI, the ATF, and Social Security, but eventually will include HHS, HUD, the IRS, and the Labor Department. But then also, you have the White House not just going after illegal immigrants, but they're rushing to strip legal ones of their status and deport them as well. And with that, you actually had NBC obtaining a memo dated May 30th that exposes how the administration's co-opting judges in that effort. Because unlike most other judges, immigration judges work under the executive branch, not the judiciary. And so the White House could distribute this memo instructing them to effectively shovel migrants out the door as quickly as possible. And doing this first by allowing Homeland Security lawyers to file motions to dismiss immigrants' cases orally instead of having to file a written motion detailing the rationale. And second, by telling the judges to grant those motions that same day without any additional documentation or briefings, rather than giving immigrants the standard 10-day chance to respond. Because then, once the case is dismissed, the immigrant can immediately be deported through expedited removal, all before they even get a chance to plead their case in front of a judge. As far as reactions to this, on the right, you have people saying all of this is necessary to get rid of the millions of people who supposedly exploited the asylum system during Biden's presidency. But then on the other side, there are some very, very different reactions to the memo. With one source close to the Immigration Judges Union telling NBC that the move is legal but still upsetting, saying they think it makes a mockery of the whole process and that it flies in the face of what Trump ran on, saying immigration enforcement means it's done in a fair manner and this isn't fair. But then also, you have others arguing that the move is just illegal, with them pointing out that the memo misquotes the section of the Immigration and Nationality Act that it cites to justify itself. So while, according to the memo, the law states that judges may grant motions to dismiss when circumstances have changed to such an extent that continuation is no longer in the best interest of the government, the law actually states that judges can dismiss when circumstances of the case have changed to such an extent that continuation is no longer in the best interest of the government. Right? And that three-word difference is important, of the case. Because as you had one expert explaining, they require DHS to justify the dismissal in terms of the particular circumstances related to each individual case. And so without those words, arguably the government would be able to dismiss cases based on more general circumstances regardless of the concrete details of the case. But then also, separate from whether this is fair or even legal, you have critics arguing at the memo it won't even work because the government lacks the capacity to detain everyone that it wants to arrest. Because according to ICE's own data, more than 51,000 immigrants were in its custody as of May 23rd, but it's only funded to hold 41,500. With also the former chief of staff at ICE under Biden telling NBC the policy, quote, targets vetted migrants who were working and had legal status. And adding, flooding the system with thousands of non-criminals wastes time and resources when federal law enforcement should be focused on national security threats. And you also have ICE's director during Obama's presidency saying, you're going to have people who are being pushed to the limit, who in a rush may not get things right, including information on a person's status. All of that takes time and effort, and this push on numbers, exclusive of whether or not the job is being done right, is very concerning. Which arguably is what we saw with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, for example. But he's the guy that the Trump administration mistakenly deported to an infamous mega prison in El Salvador despite a court order not to deport him, and then they left them there despite another court order to facilitate his return. Though there, I will say we've seen changes. Actually, as of last Friday, he's been returned to the United States, though that is not to say that he is free. Because the White House, they actually brought him back to face charges of human trafficking.
The grand jury found that over the past 9 years, Abrego Garcia has played a significant role in an alien smuggling ring. He was a smuggler of humans and children and women. MS-13 members, violent gang, terrorist organization members, throughout our country.
You also have the DOJ accusing him of trafficking guns and drugs, abusing women, soliciting nudes from a minor, and taking part in the murder of a rival gang member's mother. Though also, to be clear, at this time, they haven't actually charged him with any of that stuff. Right now, it's just the alleged human trafficking. And according to sources who spoke to ABC, the investigation that led to those charges actually began back in April after he was deported to El Salvador. So you have many saying that arguably doesn't change the alleged injustice of the deportation, and his attorneys actually made that point in a court filing, with him writing that the White House arranged for Abrego Garcia Garcia's return, not to Maryland in compliance with the Supreme Court's directive to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador, but rather to Tennessee so that he could be charged with a crime in a case that the government only developed while it was under threat of sanctions. And then adding the government's convenient ability to return Abrego Garcia in time for a press conference unveiling his indictment puts the lie to its previously feigned powerlessness to comply with the court's injunction. With then his family's attorney, Chris Newman, further telling CBS News,
I view this as a core constitutional order case, a core due process case, and it just so happens that a Salvadoran immigrant is defending bedrock constitutional protections for all of us.
Then jumping back to the situation as a whole, the Trump administration just appears to be ramping things up, not down. Because you had Stephen Miller telling Fox News late last month that ICE would set a goal of a minimum of 3,000 arrests a day, which would really be completely unprecedented numbers. I mean, they're 10 times the daily arrests that were made during the Biden administration. And as far as where they are now, you had Homeland Security saying that ICE hit 2,000 arrests a day last week, though according to the New York Times, that number slumped to 1,400 on Thursday, 1,200 on Friday, and 700 on Saturday. Though also, since taking office, Trump is taking credit for just 100,000 arrests. And of the 1.4 million people who reportedly faced deportation orders by the end of last year, the Trump administration has deported over 200,000. But for now, we'll have to wait to see how this continues to develop, and not only in do they hit their numbers, but also how they do. But then jumping from that to other news, did President Trump just make a bad trade deal? That is what we're seeing people asking after reports started coming out that Chinese officials were confirming to the media that a trade deal with the US had been worked out after both sides spent the last 2 days in London. And that appeared to be confirmed this morning when Trump posted in all caps, so you know it's serious. Our deal with China is done, subject to final approval with President Xi and me. Full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied upfront by China. Likewise, we will provide to China what was agreed to, including Chinese students using our colleges and universities, which has always been good with me. We are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%. Relationship is excellent. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now with that, Trump's post, it really doesn't give us the meat and potatoes of what was actually negotiated. And right now, we just don't know. But what is being reported is that in return for China easing restrictions on the export of rare earth minerals and magnets to America, the US would ease its own restrictions on technology sold to China. It kind of makes sense that both those products would be where the two sides started, since they both have what amounts to monopolies on them. That being said, though, there was some confusion regarding the we are getting a total of 55% tariffs line. Because back in May, the two sides made a temporary deal where Chinese goods would face a 30% tariff, so did Trump just negotiate a worse deal? But appearing like not quite. The 55% reportedly will include not only the 30% rate, but a 25% that was imposed on some Chinese goods during Trump's first term. Whereas people talking about the 30% actually never mentioned all the other stacking tariffs that were happening at the same time, which put the actual tariff rate closer to 40 to 70% depending on the item. So in the end, it means that prices on goods from China, they could be lower or more expensive. It just depends on what it is, at least compared to what it was last month, because either way, it looks like it'll be more expensive than before the trade war. Though also outside of tariff rates, you have some feeling like this is a costly agreement for the US because we finally budged on giving access to key technologies. For example, former US trade negotiator Wendy Cutler telling the New York Times, these matters have been deliberately kept off the negotiating table for years, given US insistence that national security related measures are not appropriate for a give and take. And adding, by apparently now reversing this long-held position, the US has opened the door for China that will be difficult to close. So for many, the biggest thing that this deal seems to do is end the tit-for-tat tariffs that both sides have been engaging in and open the door to further negotiation. Because this is actually just part of the negotiation process that was started last month in Geneva. The US and China signing an agreement at that time that promised to work on a deal, except also the language of the deal was vague enough that both sides kind of got to claim that it was a win. So you have many experts saying that this week's deal, it's actually more like a trade truce, and it gives both sides time to go back to the table at Geneva and put together a real comprehensive trade deal. Though some sort of deal being made would be a huge deal for the global economy, because the fact is that the trade situation constantly changing is a massive problem for manufacturers. Right? They often have no idea what the final cost of their product's going to be for consumers, which has led to some to consider completely abandoning the US market. And in general, the unease about the direction of the global economy, it's caused tensions within the markets. I mean, just look at the S&P 500, which has crashed and then rebounded over the last 6 months to where it was about a year ago, which ends up just being a year of no real growth. And outlooks like that have meant that groups like the World Bank have cut the global economic growth forecast by 0.4% to 2.3%, which is actually a pretty drastic cut. But either way, it appears that there's still a lot of work to be done if a trade deal is actually going to be reached. And that's also assuming that this one's even final. Because again, the caveat is that it's still pending final approval from both Xi and Trump. And then you've got even more news in just a minute. But first, have you ever wished that your earbuds, they could just keep up with you, like no matter where your life takes you. Because from early mornings to late night podcast binges, I need earbuds that can keep up with me. And today's sponsor, Raycon, they get it with their everyday earbuds. 32-hour battery life? Check. A quick charge. Just 10 minutes gives me 90 minutes of power. It feels like a miracle, but it's just Raycon being awesome. And tired of juggling devices? Raycon's multi-point connectivity, it lets me connect to 2 devices at once. That's the common sense tech upgrades I want. Also, active noise cancellation? Check. And all of that for a price that doesn't hurt your wallet. Block out the world and dive into your music, podcasts, or even, the awkward Zoom calls. Plus, the ergonomic fit, it's perfect. No more earaches or constantly adjusting. They stay in place even when I'm doing highly intense activities like walking to the fridge. Also, we gotta talk colors: carbon black, royal blue, lavender, and forest green. But personally, I just rock the black. It's stylish and sleek. And whether I'm editing videos or working out, Raycons fit seamlessly into my life. So do yourself a favor. Go to buyraycon.com/DeFranco for 15% off site-wide. You'll be supporting the channel and your ears. Win-win. Or even easier, scan the QR code on screen. And don't worry, Raycon offers a 30-day happiness guarantee. But then, next up from that today in international news, we gotta talk about Israel. Starting with the news that several US allies are now sanctioning 2 of the highest-ranking officials in the Israeli government against the wishes of the White House. Where you've got the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Norway targeting Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. Right, and those 2, they're controversial figures to say the least. So just some fun facts about the 2. Ben-Gvir, he's a guy who, for years, reportedly had his living room decorated with a portrait of a mass murderer who gunned down 29 Palestinians in a mosque in 1994. And Smotrich, he has literally described himself as a fascist homophobe, and he's backed the idea of segregated maternity wards separating Jewish and Arab mothers. And they're also guys who, in 2022, helped Bibi Netanyahu form what has been described as the most extreme, most right-wing government in Israeli history. And since then, they've cheered on the destruction in Gaza, and they pushed for what they call the voluntary emigration of its people so that Jewish settlers can move in. But notably here, these sanctions, they're just based on accusations of inciting violence against Palestinians in the West Bank, with a joint statement from the 5 countries saying that, quote, extremist rhetoric advocating the forced displacement of Palestinians and the creation of new Israeli settlements is appalling and dangerous. And with that, you have one Israeli human rights lawyer describing the move as historic and adding, it means the wall of immunity that Israeli politicians had has been broken. Though on the flip side, the Israeli government has, of course, condemned the news. So I will say they're not alone. You even have a rival to Netanyahu who has been described as a centrist, claiming that while he vehemently disagreed with the far-right ministers, he said that the move, it was a profound moral mistake and sends a dangerous message to terrorists around the world. And then on top of that, you had the US also condemning the sanctions, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying, we reject any notion of equivalence. Hamas is a terrorist organization that committed unspeakable atrocities, continues to hold innocent civilians hostage, and prevents the people of Gaza from living in peace. We remind our partners not to forget who the real enemy is. But notably, with that, you also had the sanctioning countries careful to say that the measures announced this week do not deviate from our unwavering support for Israel's security, and we continue to condemn the horrific terror attacks of October 7th by Hamas. And with that, you then had the Canadian foreign minister, for example, adding, these measures are directed at individuals who directly contribute to extremist settler violence. The measures are not directed against the state of Israel itself. And so with that, you actually have some people saying that's the problem, arguing that it doesn't do anything to change the situation. For example, one former Israeli peace negotiator telling the New York Times, it is performative. It doesn't harm them, and it doesn't cause the Israeli public in general to question the wisdom of the path Israel is on because it doesn't affect the broader public at all. But still, you have many saying that it's worth noting that this is part of a bigger shift that we've started to see from many of Israel's Western allies. Because this isn't happening in a bubble, and you have things like last month, for example, Britain, France, and Canada coming out with a statement saying that Israel was at a risk of breaking international law. You also had the UK and EU starting to rethink their trade relationship with Israel. So, we're gonna have to wait to see if that trend continues, if it escalates, what happens there. But all of this is, on the US side, it's actually heading in the opposite direction. Because just this week, for example, you have things like US Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, saying that the US is no longer actually pursuing the goal of an independent Palestinian state. And then he further suggested that any future Palestinian entity could be carved out of a Muslim country rather than requiring Israel to cede territory that it controls. And, while that may not sound particularly surprising coming from the US or Huckabee specifically, the fact is a two-state solution has long been a pillar of the country's Middle East policy, or at least outwardly, although critics have argued that's been more of a pretense at times. But now, Huckabee's just coming out and saying it straight up, and this is the situation in Gaza just gets worse and worse. We're seeing more and more getting added to the list, with now UN experts saying that Israel committed the crime against humanity of extermination by killing civilians, sheltering in schools and religious sites in Gaza, with them calling it a part of a concerted campaign to obliterate Palestinian life. And yesterday, Palestinians trying to access aid in Gaza, they reportedly came under fire again, with Israeli troops killing 36 people and wounding 207, according to the Palestinian Health Health Ministry, which brings the total to 163 dead and nearly 1,500 hurt in multiple shootings near aid sites run by the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And then actually on the subject of aid, we're seeing news that a convoy of buses and cars is planning to travel across Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt to get to Gaza and make a symbolic humanitarian delivery. Right, basically the same idea as the Freedom Flotilla, which launched the boat with Greta Thunberg doing the same thing before being intercepted in international waters. And actually, now with that, you have a French doctor who is also on board claiming that Israeli authorities were abusive to the detainees, telling reporters while there were no specific acts of physical violence there, he witnessed Israeli border agents mock and deliberately deprive passengers of sleep, especially Thunberg. But then finally, regarding Israel news, I want to talk about something that's threatening to bring down Netanyahu, because we're now seeing opposition parties in Israel announcing they'll be bringing a motion to dissolve parliament and thereby force new elections. So notably, it doesn't appear to be about Gaza or even the plight of Palestinians. Right, basically, the opposition is looking to capitalize on a divide within Netanyahu's governing coalition over a decades-old policy that exempts ultra-Orthodox men studying religion from compulsory military service. Because, that and some other preferential treatment given to the ultra-Orthodox students, they're unpopular with those who don't get benefits from it. But of course, Netanyahu's ultra-Orthodox coalition partners have opposed getting rid of the policy. We're gonna have to wait to see what happens there. Even if it goes a certain way, I'll say that it could take months. And so with that, Netanyahu still likely has some time to either keep his coalition together or otherwise prepare for another election. And, even if this ultimately is a thing that takes him down, who's to say what the next government's gonna be like? But that, my friend, is the end of today's show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being subscribed. And remember, I'll see you tomorrow because I got a brand new show for you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Love you, mean it, bye.